Hello! Welcome to Old Municipal Library's 12 Days of Christmas. I'm Carol Ann. I'm here by the fireplace with my cup of hot chocolate today. Oh, it's got marshmallows in it. So good. Perfect for today like today. So I'm going to read for you a prairie classic, Chinook Christmas by Rudy Wiebe, and illustrated by David Moore. This has long been a favorite, and I hope you enjoy it. The winter I turned 9 was our first in southern Alberta, and the snowy scars of irrigation ditches, circling lower and lower into the long, shallow hollow of our town, seemed to me then like the trenches of some besieging army. The gray, wrinkled snow lay driven there off the tilted fields, long, long welts of it carved in parallels below the square top of the Big Chief Mountain, 60 miles away, where the implacable general of the winds stood forever roaring at his troops advance. This is the land of the Chinooks, hence the name. Relentless west wind roaring in my head all fall, the cottonwoods bent so low east that one day I straightened up on the pedals of my bicycle and discovered I could stand motionless, balanced, the wind's weight a wall, a power that held me shivering uneasily facing into it. But then I was nudged, clubbed, and I let the wind wheel me around like always, and I spread my arms akimbo, my jacket held wide at the waist, and went no hand sailing along the gravel street through 3 ridge-stopped corners on the fly to Jakey's house. I leaned into his yard like a racing sloop, all canvas spread, and met him wobbling forward on his bike beside the little irrigation ditch that was filling their cistern for the winter. So I knocked him into that gray water, and then he knocked me into it too. "Let's ride to the main ditch," Jakey said, trying to blink through the mud in his eyes. "Sure," I said. "We'll get it anyways. We might as well get it good." He was 3 years older than I, and that summer we had become uneasy friends with the town's whole length of one-way wind between us. Because we were second cousins, twice removed at that, my father said, but for Mennonites scattered around Canada, that meant a lot of them, and mostly because neither of us had any other friends. And because of Annie. My sister Annie always knew what she wanted. "We have to have a Christmas tree," Annie said. "How'll we ever find one here? Nothing but sugar beet fields and ditches." She was 14. The spring before, when we left our bush homestead up north so my father could work in an irrigation dairy and Mama and Annie and I could thin beets, she had already been kissed once or twice under a full moon. She still thought that a good deal better than getting sunburned between endless beet rows, wrinkling up, hunched over like every other poor woman and child she saw stoop shoulder in every southern field. Up north, she and I always plowed our Christmas tree out of the muskeg, our dog bounding high through the soft cushions of snow, the air so motionless between the muskeg spruce, flounced, layered, and blazing white, with brown and green edges. "There's a tree on old Heidebrecht's front lawn," I said. "It's real pretty." "Oh, sure." And Annie sang, "Chop, chop, hurrah, Christmas in jail. How can we fail? They will throw our heads in a pail." Anyway, I told her, a Christmas tree isn't even Christian, it's heathen. Old Emma rocked, old always right, but in Low German it rhymes. Emma rocked, Hedebrocht, had the biggest Mennonite house in town. He had sold his farm to one of his sons for an unbelievable price. That was what he was mostly right about, buying low and selling very high. And now he drove a black Buick to church twice every Sunday, with his ancient daughter as stiff and erect as himself beside him. He always roared the engine until he could see a cloud of bluish smoke through the rear window. Then he'd slowly let out the clutch and began to move, shoving in the clutch as little as soon as the car threatened to go too quickly, but never taking his foot off the gas. All summer his lawn, shaded by giant cottonwoods and blue-cone spruce, was bright green like a frog's belly. A Christmas tree's heathen? Who said that, smarty head? Annie twirled around me. In Sunday school, Mr. Rempel, I said. He was tall, with broad shoulders, and had adorable, Annie had once confessed, curly blonde hair. That stopped her for 2 seconds, but I saw immediately it was astonishment at my still holding such an outdated opinion that was spreading like a cat's tongue licking over her face. She laughed out loud. He's no fun, she said irrelevantly. In fact, he's kind of dumb. How do you know? I hit her with anything I could think of. You've never even talked to him. He has curly blonde hair, Annie threw over his shoulder, going into the kitchen. I'd never had enough for her of anything. Oh, the kitchen before Christmas. A whole pasture of smells gone crazy in spring, not only from 2 kinds of cookies, oatmeal with 1 chocolate chip topping each, and pale, almost brownly bluish shapes of ammonia creatures Mama had let me stamp out of thick dough, but also cinnamon rolls with their bottoms up, exuding sweet brown syrup and dimpled raisins like twirled targets to aim an uncontrollable finger at. Mama, Eric's poking the rolls, and tiny square parushkis, with their golden tops folded up into a peak and quartered little tents of ridges, golden crust that oozed juices, red strawberry and royal purple Saskatoon and pale creamy apple. How, for the love of Christmas and stomach, could anyone keep their hands off Eric? And outside was Chinook. The evening before, a long bow of golden light had grown along the western horizon, under the ceiling of clouds hammered down over heads solid as rafters. At the end of the day, the gray monolith of Big Chief Mountain sat for a moment exposed against blue and that golden streak, like a knife tip about to slit open the rest of the horizon, with a faint smell of crushed, irrigated clover in summer slipping through to wander over the glazed drifts. And also a touch of warmth, very nearly a flare of mad possibility in the cold. Today it all blazed into actuality, my head huge as if its bones were unhinged, spread open for me to breathe that clover without sniffing after it. All the air burning with it, the drifts already wrinkling down to sodden sponges, and the air swimming limpid like creek water on a May morning. Chinook. It fondled my bare head and our chickens sang behind their tiny windows. I opened the barn door, and their acrid avian mist was swallowed whole, disappeared into the morning brilliance of Chinook. Our white-faced cow lifted her head above the dry alfalfa of her manger, her ears gesturing gently as they did whenever she was moved to ponderous, liquid eyes and bovine contentment. Go on, boss, you bulgy hay chewer, your warm flanks to butt my head against, your long, soft teeth swishing hot milk between my rhythmic fingers. Go on, you globed warm femaleness, and breathe all that spring, that momentary, maddening spring, the day before Christmas. There are still some trees left, Mrs. Orleski on her lot, I said, shifting the basket of zwieback to my other arm. Annie carried 2 pails of layered pastry for Tante Etienne, and though they were heavier, they were actually easier to carry because she could walk balanced. The basket of my bike would have been best, but the Chinook had already licked the gravel street dry in blotches and left the rest wet, water running everywhere under the snow-level ditches. It was everywhere slurp and slide and temptation not to catch your balance before you tucked your head and rolled soft and squitchy and came up all over-coated with 3 times gumbo like your laden boots. Yeah, the miserblest one we'd never. That's no word, miserblest. Miserablest? Miserable, miserablest. Rhymes with herbalist, Annie sang, skipping a puddle too nonchalantly perhaps and slipping beautifully, but sliding herself into balance so that only her left pale bottom came up, small gravel and heavy gumbo. We wiped it off with snow, left the food at Tanty Tien's barren kitchen with her small horde of children rolling their small barbarian eyes at the steamy warmth of things, and ran out before the small barbarian fingers could. Eric and I have to get back to because Mama needs us and Father is coming home after supper in the church. Annie hauled me out with her long arms and swinging muddy pail, and there was Jakey leaning against the cottonwood in the front yard, looking absolutely Chicago gangster to the very bend of his leg and cap pulled tight over his eyes. "If you want a tree so bad," he said, "why don't you take it?" Annie actually stopped and looked at him. Chinooks touched everyone differently. All he needed was a short machine gun. "There's never nobody there at night," he said. It was very hard to read Annie's expression, and Jakey must have made the same mistake I made, because he continued, still looking at his fingernails, which were very long and smooth with nice moons at their base. "Anyways, who'd miss one shitty little tree?" "I presume," Annie said, and her tone warmed me instantly. "I presume that there is never nobody there. There must always be somebody. And I presume further that not even a habitual criminal would be so stupid as to steal under such conditions, leave alone someone honest at Christmas when a Chinook is blowing." Her statement would have been stronger without mentioning either Christmas or Chinook, and I think Annie felt so too, because we hadn't left Jakey more than half a block behind, still leaning against a tree and studying the perfect moon of his fingernails, when she inexplicably commented, "He won't even get as far as his stupid dad. He'll just end up in jail." "What's the matter with Uncle Wilm?" I asked. To tell the truth, I liked Uncle Wilm. He was certainly the strongest man in town, not much taller than I, but so broad he walked sideways through any door. And he could place his thick arms under half a frozen beef and hoist it around and up onto a hook in one immense motion, without breathing hard or slipping on the sawdust under his butcher's chopping block. Unlike any other Mennonite grown-up, he cracked jokes with me, and so did Mrs. Cartwright, who sold the meat for him. Mrs. Cartwright was always dressed so perfectly, her face as careful as a picture, and when she leaned over the counter laughing, I always wanted to laugh with her, like every man who bought meat there did, though I never saw a woman do it. Her lips and teeth so red and white and marvelously smooth and exact. She laughed like no woman I had ever seen, deeply, powerfully, her entire vivid body pushing itself out at me and moving with it until I felt tight and awkward somehow, inexplicably then embarrassed. "He's not our uncle, thank Jehoshaphat," Annie snapped, and then, seeing me goggle-eyed, said quickly, "There's Mr. Ireland. Let's catch a ride." Mr. Ireland's dray, with its unmatched grays, was moving toward the Canadian Pacific Railway station in the evening shadow of the elevators, but it seemed that in any case Annie had intended not to go directly home, but rather downtown, as we call it. Our town had 3 parallel streets south of the railway tracks and 3 north, with avenues at right angles numbered 100 at the center, higher and lower on either side, in anticipation of more or less measureless and endless growth. So we hopped aboard the wagon and bounced along, dangling our legs off the tailgate. The horses trotted while Mr. Ireland sang, the biggest gray plopping out hot, steamy buns, and Mr. Ireland interrupting himself to mutter, "Enough time for that later, Jock. Get on with you." He slapped the mountainous rear gently with a flat rein, and the buns appeared behind the wagon under us, in perfect single-file pattern, like a queue of smooth-headed children, steaming slightly as they sank out of sight in the gumbo. The Chinook blustered violently through the trees and over a roof, and suddenly Mr. Ireland began to roar with it as we passed the Japanese Buddhist church that was swallowing a snake of small brown children I knew. Oh, he shot her through the window, and the windows in her yet. The Chinook blustered violently through the trees and over a roof, and the dray sighed silently across Main Street at 101st Avenue on its fat balloon tires salvaged from World War II fighter planes. A huge black truck with its grain box standing tight full of Hutterites, beards and polka-dotted kerchiefs facing into the wind, rolled past and squitched a gray pothole of mud at us, but missed. "Do men have yets, too?" I asked Annie. "Yets?" He sang the bullers in her yet. Annie laughed. "No," she spluttered, "only women, and you have to shoot them through their windows to hit their yets." But then, still laughing, she knocked one of our pails off, and we had to jump anyways because we were passing the high front of the largest grocery and hardware store, Dirksen Brothers proprietors, and that's where Mrs. Orleski had her Christmas trees leaning against the wall. Mrs. Orleski usually sold Lethbridge Heralds at the corner for a nickel, perhaps 2 or 3 a day, since Hermie Kudrick had the town sewed up with home delivery. Hermie owned a CCM 3-speed by the time he was 10, a Harley Davidson at 15, and an Olds convertible at 19, all starting from Herald's saturation of our town. But when the Dirksen brothers started playing Christmas carols on the gramophone at the back of their store, she shifted to the vacant lot. One day it was white, bare, the next heavy green, thick with needled aroma, like the mountains where Mrs. Orleski and her son worked deep in the Crow's Nest mines. I could not imagine that then. Crow's nests were bundles of sticks notched high and poplars, and a coal mine was what? When her son came home for one day at Christmas, you could see the coal dust ingrained in his skin like topsoil in the drifts of a 3-day prairie blizzard. His shoulders had the hockey player's powerful slope and were only a little narrower than Uncle Wilm's. And he liked to show his favorite muscle, a bulge when he bent his elbow that heaved up and clenched itself rock hard. Not even Whipper Billy Watson, the heavyweight wrestling champion of the world, could muster that, he said. He knew because he had once challenged Watson to show, and that dead white mound of muscle from Toronto had backed off. Nothing but the usual stuff in his arm. "Jolly old St. Nicholas, lean your ear this way, don't you tell a single soul," murmured the wall of the store. If the Dirksen brothers leaned any farther, Annie said they would fall over. "You kits still looking?" Mrs. Orleski put her hands from between her 3 summer coats and whatever else she wore underneath, sweaters and skirts and every kind of unmentionable. "Sell lots to sell this year, see?" And she gestured with her arms wide, a thick little stump turning as if to break into a dance. There were only 3 trees left, 3 scrunchy trees and a trampled scatter of spruce tips and sodden snow. And abruptly she wheeled, her nostrils flared into the Chinook, opening huge like gills in fast water. Here, they leave it, the little branches. They leave it a lotsa." She was stooping, gathering up with the swift, inevitable hands of workers, sometimes stump, have too much branch, and she thrust them at me, offering in the wimpling eddy of the sun and wind-warmed wall a stinging memory of motionless, feathered muskeg. Our black dog plunging head and tail through the crystalline velvet sinking of it, the indented spoors of rabbits and slither of weasels, Mrs. Orleski's 2 stubby arms filled with spruce boughs like a proffered squirrel's nest, stuffed fat and full and warm for the winter. "You take it. It's good. Hang it some places. Mama happy. So," offering the wistful, windy madness of a gift, Annie said, "I'm sorry," and stared at her in horror. "We still have no money." "Well, I no take it your money. Give for nothing. You take." And I took and ran. Annie behind me argued, the very bend of her body declaring that she could not accept a gift from someone as poor as herself, and certainly not from anyone richer, and so she refused to accept anything from anyone ever, and finally thanked the old lady almost angrily, as if forced, and followed me, her long legs scissoring through the last sunshine, past the principal's yellow and green house, and across the schoolyard. The little oriental houses stood one by one along the south side of the street, their double windows with their pale, never-opened blinds dreaming through the long winter like unfathomable Buddhas. It's Christmas, and anyway, it cleans up her lot. But any word of mine just set Annie's teeth more visibly into her bottom lip. Her head lowered into the branches as if she would chew needles. Both her pails were stuck full, and my basket was too small for all my armful, but I didn't drop a twig all the way home, and I slid neither flat nor flying in the mud either. Old Amarak passed us, alone in a procession in his smoking Buick. In the rich darkness of the car, his whiskers flared from the sides of his face like white flames, reaching for the side windows as he drove without headlights, his arms braced rigid before him, and his eyes peering ahead as if to eliminate the fluid road with their glare. The Chinook seeped spruce through my head. Had I known about such things, I would have known I was at least drunk when I heaved up my branches, waved, shouted, "Happy Christmas!" And his head turned around to us, trudging the shoulder of the road, turned heavily around like a row of cannon wheeling. And he saw me, his eyes briefly, the driven ends of spikes and huge polished flank of the car lurched towards me as at a recognition, before his head trundled back and cocked forward again on his long neck over the steering wheel, and his stiff arms kept his shoulders ram-backed against the seat, and his beaked nose defied that lunatic wind, dared it to squirm him into the gumbo ditch. He would not turn that wheel. He would not raise either his foot from the gas or his left foot from the clutch, and so he roared away into the warm, settling dusk of Christmas Eve, finally emerging far ahead of us into the misty dinosaur legs of the cottonwoods surrounding his immense yard, an antediluvian monster roaring in futile anthem to the cacophonous wonders of the Christ-child season. Gifts upon gifts, the smell of gas and clutch plate snipped at our nostrils through the green of spruce, till we saw the rectangular windows of our house, stunned golden every one, with the vanished sun reflecting from the laden, burning bellies of the clouds, and the mud squishing under our feet, and the prick of spruce on our cold wrists and fingers. I looked at Annie. Her hair streamed flat under wind, and cloven flames of windows and sky glistened, blazed in her eyes. "Don't say a word," she said. And I did that. Even when I saw our father was already home because the dairy pickup was parked outside our door, I said nothing. But once inside, oh, talk! Our house was packed tight with smells like nuts and Christmas cake, and we hung our branches singing everywhere until its 2 rooms seemed flung all over with a green and poignant spray. Then we stepped into the fresh darkness, and the purring, dialed cab of the truck wafted us to church. A wide building where the men sat in 2 broad aisles on the right, and the women in 2 broad aisles on the left, and we children crammed in front, directly under the benign, for tonight, faces of the aged ministers leaning over the pulpit, and the choir curved around behind us. We sang those Christmas songs our people had brought from half a world away, so out of place now in the treeless, flat irrigation prairies, but not at all out of spirit. Lightly falleth the snow, still and white rests the sea. Woods glisten under the moon. Joy to thee, Christ child, comes soon. The high, beautiful voices of the women, the deep, heavy voices of the men, and the bright thread of my father's tenor between them, where he sat behind me among rich farmers and storekeepers, and workers and teachers and unemployed laborers. 2 ministers spoke, very short, mostly stories, and there were several long prayers, and the choir sang, several children's groups sang, and then we all sang again, "The sun has already risen in the heavenly glory. Hail, heavenly night, O most holy. O Christmas, how lovely thou art." And then young men came in with big boxes and gave every child a small brown bag, which we were not allowed to open in church, but could so easily feel whether we had an orange or an apple, and there was at least 1 chocolate bar, and almost a whole handful of peanuts, and maybe even 6 or 7 candies, and then we sang in whatever language we liked, Silent night, holy night, all is calm, all is bright. Round yon virgin mother and child, holy infant so tender and mild, sleep in heavenly peace, sleep in heavenly peace. And then without talking or running around, we all went quickly and quietly home. No clouds now, the sky was brilliant, clear black with crystals of stars frozen over us. The air is silent as a curtain. Tomorrow would be very cold. And on our front stepped a small wooden box. I bumped against it as I jumped for the door, trying to get in fast to see whether I had an O. Henry or a Sweet Marie in my bag. The board squeaked up. What was that? Those are oranges, my father said, Japanese oranges. Roundly moist in their pale wrappers, they unzippered themselves under his fingernails symmetrically with a strange, sharp sweetness, like regular little oriental shelves opening. Who could have left them for us? Such a vividly useless gift, all you could do was eat it. So we did. Annie and I each ate 9. Then my father read, as he always did, from, "And there went out a decree from Caesar Augustus, all the way to where the shepherds returned to their flocks, glorifying and praising God." And then we each said a very short prayer with the house so quiet now that I could hear the coal shift as it burned in the stove. And Annie and I placed our plates, like always, the very biggest we could find, on the kitchen table under the spruce branches, all ready for the gifts we knew we would get from that close. Always useful gifts, like toothbrushes or socks or a shirt at most. And then we climbed up the narrow stairs to our 2 small rooms with a final 10th Japanese shelving itself lingering in our mouths. Annie asked, "Who was it, breathing orange in the darkness?" I said, "Who knows?" But I did. I knew it as certainly as a child knows everything at Christmas, as certainly as the hard, clear sanity of the north wind song beginning at the window, and in my ear our little house, I believe, swaying gently, like a cradle, very, very gently. The end. That is Chinook Christmas by Rudy Wiebe. A charming and evocative look at life on the prairies, especially southern prairies with the Chinooks. You could get this at the library. Thank you for joining me today on Olds Library's 12 Days of Christmas. Hope you can join me again next time. Bye-bye.